Hello, I'm Sarah, a 33-year-old elementary school teacher from Denver. I've always believed family was the most important thing in life, the unbreakable bond, the unconditional love, the people who would always have your back no matter what. That's what I thought family meant. Until I discovered that everything I believed about my family was a carefully constructed lie. Standing in the pouring rain outside our old family home, the one my parents had just signed papers to sell, I felt the weight of betrayal crushing me. No one knew that my grandmother had secretly left this house to me in her will on June 12, 2023. And what I was about to do next would shake my family to its core. Growing up, the dynamic in our house was painfully clear. There was Emily, my 29-year-old sister, the golden child, the marketing manager with the perfect smile and the perfect life. Then there was me, Sarah, the disappointment, the one who settled for teaching instead of pursuing something more prestigious. My father, Robert, 62, and my mother, Linda, 60, never missed an opportunity to remind me how I measured up against my younger sister. Emily's husband, Chad, 31, a banker with connections, fit right into their world, becoming another voice in the chorus that consistently drowned out mine. The pattern was always the same. When Emily needed something, the family rallied. When I needed help, I was told to figure it out myself. "You're the older one. Sarah, you should be more independent," my mother would say, her voice dripping with that particular tone she reserved just for me. On March 15, 2021, Emily came to me with a business proposal. She wanted to start her own marketing agency and needed seed money. "Just $20,000, she said, as if it were pocket change. "I'll pay you back with interest once we're profitable." Against my better judgment, I took out a loan against my teacher's pension to help her. The loan I'm still paying off to this day. Whenever I brought up repayment, the gaslighting began. "You're being too sensitive. We were just joking about the timeline," Emily would say, laughing it off. My parents would join in. "Why can't you be more understanding like Emily would be? Why can't you be more successful like your sister so $20,000 wouldn't feel like such a burden?" But the final breaking point happened on October 23, 2023, during a family meeting at the Aspen Valley Country Club in Colorado. My father stood up, champagne glass in hand, and made an announcement that stopped my heart. "Linda and I have decided to sell Grandma's old house," he declared, beaming at Emily. "We're going to use the money, all $450,000 of it, to help Emily expand her business." He didn't even look at me as he said it. Not once. My cousin Emma was there. So was our family lawyer, Mr. Harrison. They saw my face drain of color. They heard the silence that fell as I struggled to breathe. Because they didn't know what I knew. My grandmother had changed her will before she died. She'd left that house to me, specifically to me, with instructions that I was to inherit it upon her passing. I had the email she sent dated June 12, 2023, explaining her decision, saying she wanted at least one thing to go to me instead of Emily for once. "Dad, you can't sell the house," I said quietly. "Grandma left it to me in her will." The laughter that followed was the kind that cuts deeper than any knife. "Oh, Sarah," my mother said, shaking her head. "Always the dramatic one. Your grandmother would never do that. She knew Emily needed it more." I sat in my 2018 Toyota Camry afterward, hands shaking on the steering wheel. I had tried one last time to convince them. "Dad, I have Grandma's will. This is illegal. Please don't do this." His response? "Sarah, even if that were true, which it isn't, what kind of daughter would try to keep something from her sister who needs it more? Family helps family." That was the moment I decided I would never let them take advantage of me again. What my family didn't know, what they never bothered to find out, was that I wasn't just a school teacher living paycheck to paycheck. 3 years earlier, I had used my teacher grant money to start investing in real estate through an LLC called Safe Nest Properties. Small at first, a duplex here, a foreclosure there. I lived frugally, reinvested every penny, and quietly built my portfolio. By the time my father announced his plans to sell my grandmother's house, My assets totaled $1.8 million. I also held secret stakes in 2 coffee shops in Seattle, investments I'd made with a former colleague who believed in me when my family didn't. I had always kept my success private, partly because I knew my family would immediately try to benefit from it, but mostly because I was waiting for them to see my worth without the dollar signs attached. They never did. So I made a plan. I gathered evidence. Bank statements showing the $20,000 loan to Emily, the email with my grandmother's will explicitly leaving the house to me, dated June 12, 2023, signed by her and witnessed properly. I consulted with attorneys from the Whitfield Legal Group, who confirmed what I already knew. My parents were illegally selling property that wasn't theirs to sell. I chose my moment carefully. August 5, 2024. Emily and Chad's engagement party, the perfect setting for the truth to come out. I had an unexpected ally in my former boss, Thomas Wilson. He had overheard my parents berating me over the phone once when they called during school hours, and he never forgot how they spoke to me. When I told him my plan, he offered to help in any way he could. The grand ballroom of the Belmont Plaza in Chicago glittered with chandeliers and champagne flutes on the night of the engagement party. 200 guests mingled and laughed, including family from both sides. I arrived late, deliberately so. I wore an Eliza Couture dress, one my mother had once called ridiculously extravagant when I'd shown her the design online. My hair was up, my makeup flawless, my confidence unwavering. I waited until after the toasts, until after my father had once again praised Emily's business acumen and announced that the house sale would be finalized the next week, with proceeds going to fund the next phase of Emily's company expansion. Then I walked to the small stage where the string quartet had been playing. I nodded to Thomas, who connected his laptop to the projection system. The screen lit up with documents, my grandmother's will, her email to me, bank statements showing the money I'd lent Emily, and finally, a cease and desist letter from my attorneys addressing the illegal sale of property rightfully belonging to me. "I'd like to make an announcement," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "For those who don't know me well, I'm Sarah, Emily's sister, and there are a few things my family hasn't been telling you." The room fell silent. I could see my mother's face drain of color. "What is the meaning of this?" she whispered, but the microphone picked it up anyway. "Mom, Dad, Emily, Chad, I've tried to talk to you privately about these matters for years. You've ignored me, belittled me, and taken advantage of my good nature. That ends tonight." I went through each document methodically, explaining the significance as the evidence was displayed for everyone to see. "This house you're selling," I said, looking directly at my father, "was left specifically to me by Grandma. She knew how you favored Emily. She wanted to make sure I got something. And yet, you're selling it illegally and giving the money to Emily. Again." Emily jumped up. "This is fake. She's making this up because she's jealous." My father stood, attempting damage control. "Sarah, honey, let's discuss this privately as a family." But then something unexpected happened. My Aunt Margaret rose from her seat near the back. "I knew something wasn't right," she said loudly. "Your grandmother told me she was changing her will before she passed. I thought you all knew." She looked at my parents with disappointment etched across her face. The aftermath was swift and merciless. My attorneys filed for damages of $300,000 for the attempted theft of my inheritance. Emily lost 50,000 Instagram followers overnight as the story spread through their social circles. My parents had to petition to void the sale contract on the house, an embarrassing legal process that made local news. And within 2 weeks, my father filed for divorce from my mother, blaming her for encouraging Emily's entitlement and creating the situation. The family that had been so united in diminishing me fractured completely when faced with the consequences of their actions. I moved to Seattle afterward, expanding Safe Nest Properties with 2 new branches. Last I heard, Emily was working retail at Target. I've seen her there, forcing a smile when our paths cross. Chad left her when her business collapsed without the injection of cash they'd been counting on. My mother calls occasionally, her voice hesitant and apologetic, but I keep our conversations brief. My father hasn't spoken to me since that night. But here's what I discovered. Family isn't always blood. After everything happened, I found my true family in the friends and colleagues who supported me regardless of what I could do for them. Thomas and his wife have me over for dinner every Sunday. My fellow teachers send me texts just to check in. My tenants bake me cookies during the holidays. It's been 14 months since that night at the Belmont Plaza. My company just hit $6 million in revenue. I donated money to establish a scholarship fund for aspiring teachers at my alma mater. I bought a beautiful home overlooking Puget Sound, where I host gatherings for the people who genuinely care about me. Sometimes people ask if I regret what I did, if I miss my family. The truth is, I don't regret standing up for myself. What I regret is not doing it sooner. I regret the years I spent trying to earn love that should have been unconditional. Blood doesn't always make family. Sometimes, family is what you build from the ashes of what you thought you had. And if you're being used, manipulated, or diminished by the people who are supposed to love you most, don't be afraid to stand up and reclaim what's rightfully yours, your dignity, your worth, and your right to be respected. I learned that lesson the hard way, but standing in my truth, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can give them, I can honestly say I've never been happier. After my grandmother died, I found a letter she'd written to me but never sent. In it, she said, "Sarah, you have always been stronger than you know. Don't let them convince you otherwise." She was right. I am strong. And now, finally, everyone knows it. The sale of my grandmother's house wasn't just about the money. Though $450,000 is certainly nothing to dismiss, it was about the pattern, the years of favoritism, the constant message that Emily deserved more simply because she was Emily. My parents hadn't even consulted me about selling a house that legally belonged to me. They just assumed, as they always had, that I would step aside for my sister's benefit. I still remember the day my grandmother showed me the property records with my name on them. "This will be yours someday," she had said, her hands weathered but steady as she pointed to the document. "I've watched how they treat you. Sarah, it isn't right." When she died 3 months later, I thought my parents would honor her wishes. I was naive enough to believe that they would finally see me, really see me, and understand that Grandma had made this choice deliberately. Instead, they pretended the will didn't exist. When I mentioned it, they dismissed me as confused or mistaken. In the months leading up to that final confrontation, I gathered more than just legal evidence. I collected memories, too. Every instance when Emily's achievements were celebrated while mine were ignored. Every family vacation planned around Emily's schedule without consideration for mine. Every holiday where Emily received thoughtful gifts while I got generic gift cards. I documented the emotional toll of being the family scapegoat, the anxiety, the depression, the constant questioning of my own worth. I consulted with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics. Dr. Levinson helped me understand that what I had experienced was a form of emotional abuse. The golden child scapegoat dynamic is incredibly damaging, she explained, and it rarely changes without significant intervention. The night before the engagement party, I sat alone in my apartment, questioning my decision. Was I being vindictive? Was I no better than them if I chose such a public moment to reveal the truth? But then I received a text from Emily. "Can't wait to show you the plans for the new office space tomorrow. Using Grandma's house money for something great. She would have been so proud." She knew. She had to know about the will, and she didn't care. The moment I stepped onto that stage at the engagement party, I felt a strange calm. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. For my grandmother who had tried to protect me, and for the little girl I once was, who could never understand why her parents' love seemed conditional. As I spoke, I watched recognition dawn on the faces of extended family members who had witnessed the disparity in treatment over the years, but never said anything. Aunt Margaret wasn't the only one who stood up for me that night. Cousin Emma approached me afterward, tears in her eyes. "I always knew," she whispered. "I just didn't know what to do about it." "You could have said something," I replied. the hurt still fresh despite my victory. "You're right," she admitted. "I'm sorry I didn't." The legal battle that followed was surprisingly brief. My evidence was irrefutable, and my parents' attorney advised them to settle quickly to avoid further publicity. The house was transferred to my name, along with damages for the attempted fraudulent sale. What surprised me most was how quickly my parents turned on each other when their carefully constructed family narrative collapsed. My father blamed my mother for coddling Emily too much. My mother accused my father of setting impossible standards that pitted the girls against each other. Neither of them accepted their own responsibility in creating the toxic dynamic that ultimately destroyed our family. Emily's response was the most predictable. She played the victim, claiming she had no idea about the will or that the money she'd borrowed was causing me financial strain. Sarah's always been jealous of me. She told anyone who would listen. She's trying to ruin my life because she can't stand that I'm successful. But her words didn't have the same power anymore. People had seen the evidence. They had witnessed the truth. In the months that followed, I discovered strength I never knew I had. I spoke at conferences about financial independence for women. I mentored young teachers struggling with student loans. I created a life filled with purpose and genuine connections. The Safe Nest Properties portfolio continued to grow. I specialized in affordable housing for families transitioning out of difficult situations, people who, like me, were starting over and building something new from painful experiences. Last month, I received an invitation to my father's second wedding. I didn't attend, but I sent a card wishing him well. My mother has started therapy, trying to understand her role in what happened. Emily rarely posts on social media these days, but when she does, the carefully curated perfection is gone. There's something more authentic in her photos now, a humility that wasn't there before. Sometimes healing comes from unexpected places. For me, it came from standing in my truth and refusing to accept less than I deserved. It came from building boundaries and surrounding myself with people who respected them. My grandmother's house sits empty now. I can't bring myself to sell it, despite the offers I've received. Instead, I'm renovating it into a community center for after-school programs, a place where children can feel valued and seen for exactly who they are. Because that's the lesson in all of this. We all deserve to be seen. We all deserve to have our boundaries respected. And sometimes, creating the family we need means leaving behind the family we were born into. Standing in my grandmother's garden, planting tulips that won't bloom until spring. I find myself thinking about legacy. Not the legacy of money or property, but the legacy of how we treat each other, the legacy of truth over convenience, the legacy of self-worth over self-sacrifice. My grandmother understood that. In her final act of love, she gave me more than a house. She gave me permission to value myself when no one else would, and that has made all the difference. The weeks following the engagement party revelation were a blur of legal meetings and uncomfortable confrontations. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from relatives choosing sides, friends asking for the real story, and journalists seeking interviews about the family scandal that had captivated Denver's social circles. I declined all interview requests. This wasn't about public humiliation. It was about correcting a long-standing injustice. Still, I couldn't control the narrative once it escaped the confines of that ballroom. People talked. Screenshots of Emily's more boastful Instagram posts circulated alongside details of my parents' attempted property theft. The court of public opinion rendered its verdict swiftly and mercilessly. Chad's family was particularly incensed. His father, a respected judge, pulled me aside at the courthouse during one of the hearings. "I want you to know," he said gravely, "that I had my suspicions about your sister from the beginning. Chad wouldn't listen. Perhaps now he will." I hadn't anticipated becoming the catalyst for Chad's disillusionment with his fiancée, but 3 weeks after the party, he broke off their engagement. Emily blamed me for that too. Of course, she left a tearful voicemail. "Are you happy now? You've taken everything from me." I didn't return the call. What could I say? That I hadn't taken anything. I had simply stopped her from taking what was mine? That her relationship had fallen apart because it was built on false pretenses and materialism? That perhaps losing everything might give her the perspective she so desperately needed? Instead, I focused on rebuilding my life on my terms. I submitted my resignation at the elementary school where I'd taught for 7 years. Principal Diaz tried to convince me to stay. "The children adore you, Sarah," she said, her eyes sad. "Teaching is your calling." "It is," I agreed, "but I need some time to figure out what that looks like now." The truth was, I couldn't stay in Denver with the weight of my family's judgment pressing down on me. Every grocery store trip risked an awkward encounter. Every school event might bring me face to face with parents who had attended the infamous engagement party. Seattle offered the fresh start I needed. My business partners in the coffee shops were thrilled when I proposed relocating permanently and taking a more active role in the operations. The first month in my new city, I rented a small apartment with a view of Elliott Bay and spent my evenings walking along the waterfront, breathing in the salty air and feeling the knots in my chest slowly unraveling. I didn't completely disconnect from my old life. Thomas and I spoke weekly. He kept me updated on Denver gossip without judgment, letting me decide how much I wanted to know about my family's imploding lives. It was through him that I learned my father had moved into a condo downtown after filing for divorce, that my mother had started drinking more heavily, that Emily had failed to secure new investors after the scandal. "Your father asked about you," Thomas mentioned during one call, his tone carefully neutral. "What did he want to know?" I asked, surprised. "If you were okay, if you needed anything." I laughed without humor. 20 years too late for that question, isn't it? Yet something in me softened slightly at the thought of my father wondering about my welfare. Not enough to reach out. The wounds were still too fresh for that. But enough to acknowledge that people are complex, capable of both terrible cruelty and genuine remorse. 6 months after moving to Seattle, I purchased a Victorian home in Queen Anne that needed significant renovation. The project became my therapy. I knocked down walls, ripped up carpets, selected paint colors, and created a space that reflected who I truly was: strong, creative, unafraid of hard work. As Safe Nest Properties expanded, I hired a team of like-minded individuals who shared my vision for ethical property management. We focused on neighborhoods in transition, buying rundown buildings and transforming them into affordable housing without displacing existing communities. The profits were substantial, but the real reward was creating spaces where people felt secure. My grandmother would have approved. I think she had grown up poor in rural Colorado, the daughter of coal miners who never owned their own home. Her marriage to my grandfather had provided financial security, but she never forgot what it felt like to live with the constant anxiety of unstable housing. Perhaps that's why she'd been so adamant about leaving the house to me. She recognized in me the same drive to create safety for others. On the anniversary of her death, I flew back to Denver briefly to visit her grave. I brought tulips, her favorite, and sat beside the headstone, telling her about my new life as if she could hear me. "I wish you could see it, Grandma," I said, tracing the engraved letters of her name. "I wish you could see that I'm finally happy." As I stood to leave, I noticed a familiar figure watching me from several rows away. My mother. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched against the autumn chill. For a moment, we simply stared at each other across the distance. Then she raised her hand in a hesitant wave. I didn't wave back, but I didn't immediately walk away either. We existed in that liminal space between estrangement and reconciliation, neither ready to cross the divide but both acknowledging its presence. Finally, I nodded once and turned to go. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Back in Seattle, I threw myself into a new project, a scholarship foundation for first-generation college students pursuing education degrees. I named it after my grandmother and funded it initially with $200,000 from my own savings. Within a year, we were supporting 15 future teachers through their university programs. At the first scholarship award ceremony, I stood at the podium looking out at the recipients, young men and women whose faces shone with possibility and determination. "Teaching is a calling," I told them, echoing Principal Diaz's words to me. It's about seeing potential in others that they might not yet see in themselves. It's about creating safe spaces where growth can happen. Afterward, a young woman named Lucia approached me, her scholarship certificate clutched tightly in her hands. "My family doesn't understand why I want to be a teacher," she confessed. "They think I'm wasting my time on a low-paying career." I smiled, recognizing her struggle. The most important things we do rarely come with the highest price tags attached. What matters is that you know your own worth. "How do you do that?" she asked. "Know your worth when everyone is telling you you're wrong?" I thought about my journey, the pain, the confrontation, the rebuilding. "You listen to the quiet voice inside that knows the truth," I said finally. "And you surround yourself with people who help that voice grow stronger, not those who try to silence it." As I approach the 2-year mark of my new life, I've come to understand that healing isn't linear. There are still days when a casual comment or familiar gesture sends me spiraling back into old insecurities. There are moments when I question whether I could have handled things differently, whether the public confrontation was necessary. But then I remember my grandmother's words, "You have always been stronger than you know." And I realize that strength sometimes means making difficult choices, even when they hurt, even when they change everything. Last week, I received an email from Emily. It was brief, just a few lines. "I'm working on myself. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I understand now what I did wrong." I haven't replied yet. I'm not sure if I will. Some relationships can't be repaired once they're broken. Some betrayals cut too deep for simple apologies to heal. But the fact that I'm considering my response rather than dismissing it outright feels like progress. The house my grandmother left me has been completely transformed. The community center opened 3 months ago, offering after-school arts programs, tutoring, and a safe space for neighborhood children. I named it The Haven, a place where everyone is valued, everyone belongs. On opening day, a local reporter asked me why I'd chosen to create a community center rather than selling the valuable property. "Because some things are worth more than money," I replied. "Some legacies are about more than what we own. They're about what we build for others." As I cut the ribbon and watched children stream into the building that once represented so much pain and conflict, I felt my grandmother's presence beside me, her hand on my shoulder, her voice in my ear. "You've always been stronger than you know." And finally, at long last, I believed her. The first year after the confrontation taught me that healing happens in unexpected ways. I discovered that some days, getting out of bed and facing the world was its own kind of victory. Other days, I found myself laughing uncontrollably at something trivial, the joy bubbling up from some untapped reserve I didn't know I possessed. Thomas and his wife Maria became my anchors during the transition. When I expressed interest in selling the coffee shops to focus entirely on SafeNest properties, Thomas offered perspective I hadn't considered. "The coffee shops connect you to the community in a way real estate doesn't," he pointed out over dinner at their Seattle home. "People gather there, they create memories. Don't underestimate the value of that." He was right. I kept my stake in the coffee shops and expanded them instead, creating spaces that reflected my philosophy. Everyone deserves a place where they feel welcome. We hired staff transitioning from homelessness, installed community boards for local events, and hosted monthly open mic nights that quickly became neighborhood institutions. My property business continued to thrive as well. I developed a reputation for ethical practices in an industry often criticized for putting profits above people. When a major development corporation approached me with a buyout offer that would have made me a multimillionaire many times over, I declined. "I didn't build this to sell it," I explained to the puzzled executives. "I built it to change how things are done." The CEO, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes, studied me thoughtfully before responding. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago," she said, "before compromises and shareholders diluted my vision. Don't lose that clarity. Ms. Hayes, it's rarer than you think." Meanwhile, news from Denver trickled in through various channels. My father remarried, a woman he'd apparently been seeing on the side for years. which explained the swift divorce from my mother. Emily struggled to rebuild her marketing business after losing her major clients in the scandal. My mother joined a support group for parents estranged from their adult children. I received a formal letter from my mother's therapist 6 months after our cemetery encounter, asking if I would consider participating in a mediated conversation as part of her recovery process. I declined, writing back, "I wish her well on her journey, but I'm not responsible for her healing." It might have seemed harsh to an outsider, but I had learned the hard way that maintaining boundaries was essential for my own well-being. I couldn't set myself on fire to keep others warm, not anymore. The transformation of my grandmother's house into the Haven brought unexpected connections back into my life. My cousin Emma volunteered to run art workshops twice a month, driving up from Colorado Springs where she now lived with her husband and daughter. "I want to be part of something good that came from all this," she explained during her first visit, her eyes taking in the colorful murals and busy activity rooms that had once been formal sitting areas and sterile guest bedrooms. Through Emma, I learned more about the family fallout after my departure. Apparently, Aunt Margaret had become something of a crusader, calling out other instances of favoritism and manipulation within the extended family. "She quotes you all the time," Emma told me with a small smile. "Stand in your truth," she says. "You started something bigger than you know." Sarah. The thought was both terrifying and empowering. I had never intended to become a catalyst for wider family reform, but there was satisfaction in knowing that my stand had ripple effects beyond my immediate situation. As the Haven grew in popularity and impact, I received an unexpected visitor one Tuesday afternoon. I was helping a group of middle schoolers with their science projects when I glanced up to see Chad, Emily's ex-fiancé, standing awkwardly in the doorway. My stomach dropped. I excused myself from the children and approached him cautiously. "Chad, this is a surprise." He looked different, thinner, with a beard now, and less of the polished banker aesthetic he'd cultivated during his time with Emily. "I'm sorry to show up unannounced," he said. "I've been trying to work up the courage to contact you for months." We moved to my small office, where he sat perched on the edge of a chair as if ready to flee at any moment. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice steady despite his obvious discomfort. "I knew about the will, Emily told me, and I went along with it." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "You knew? And you said nothing?" He nodded, unable to meet my eyes. "Emily convinced me it was for the best, that you had a stable job while she was building something important, that your grandmother wouldn't have minded." "And you believe that?" I couldn't keep the incredulity from my voice. "I wanted to," he admitted. "It made things simpler, but after that night at the engagement party, after seeing everything laid bare, I couldn't lie to myself anymore." He finally looked up. "I've spent the last year trying to figure out who I am without the influence of your family. It hasn't been easy." I wasn't sure what he wanted from me. Absolution, perhaps, or understanding. I couldn't offer either. Not fully. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm trying to make amends where I can," he said simply. "And because I thought you should know that Emily wasn't acting alone. We were all complicit in different ways." After he left, I sat in my office for a long time, processing this new piece of information. There was something freeing about having my suspicions confirmed, that it hadn't been just Emily manipulating situations, but a collective effort by those around her. The knowledge didn't erase the hurt, but it contextualized it in a way that made it easier to carry. That evening, I called Dr. Levinson, my therapist from Denver who had been conducting sessions with me remotely since my move. "Chad's visit has me questioning everything again," I admitted. "If everyone knew about the will and chose to ignore it, what does that say about me? Was I really so insignificant to all of them?" "It says nothing about your worth," she responded firmly. "It speaks to their moral compromises, not your value. Remember, people who are secure in themselves don't need to diminish others." Her words helped, as they always did. But the real healing came later that night as I walked through the Haven after everyone had gone home. The building that had once represented my family's betrayal now echoed with children's laughter, displayed student artwork on its walls, and housed programs that were changing lives in tangible ways. I had transformed my pain into purpose. I had refused to be defined by what was done to me, and instead created something that defined me on my own terms. 2 years after the confrontation, I received an invitation that gave me pause. My mother wanted to visit the Haven. The request came through Emma, who assured me she would accompany her aunt and respect whatever boundaries I set. I agreed to a brief, supervised visit during regular operating hours. No private conversation, no emotional ambushes. When the day arrived, I watched from my office window as Emma's car pulled into the parking lot. My mother emerged slowly, looking older than her years, hesitant in a way I'd never associated with the woman who had once ruled our family with quiet but absolute authority. I met them in the main hall, maintaining a professional demeanor as I would with any visitor. "Welcome to the Haven," I said, extending my hand rather than offering a hug. "Would you like a tour?" My mother took my hand, holding it a moment longer than necessary. "Yes," she said, her voice thick. "I'd very much like to see what you've built." As we moved through the building, I explained the programs, introduced staff members, showed off student projects. My mother said little, but I could feel her eyes on me constantly, studying the woman I had become in her absence. In the art room, a wall display of self-portraits by elementary students caught her attention. "What's the theme here?" she asked, gesturing to the colorful drawings. "Who I am inside," I explained. "We asked the children to draw not just what they look like, but what makes them special, their dreams, their strengths, the things other people might not see at first glance." She stared at the pictures for a long time before speaking again. "You always were good at seeing people," she said quietly. "Really seeing them. I forgot that about you." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a direct acknowledgement of everything that had happened between us. But in its own way, it was a recognition, perhaps the first genuine one she had offered me in decades. "Thank you for showing me this place," she said as they prepared to leave. "It's extraordinary, like you." I didn't hug her goodbye. I wasn't ready for that, but I did walk them to their car. Standing in the parking lot long after they'd driven away, feeling something shift inside me, not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. That night, I added a new entry to the journal I'd been keeping since the confrontation. I wrote about my mother's visit, about Chad's confession, about the complex web of emotions that continued to evolve with each new development. And then I wrote something I hadn't fully articulated before. "I am not defined by what my family failed to give me. I am defined by what I choose to give myself and what I choose to give others. That is my legacy. That is my revenge. Living well, living authentically, living generously in spite of everything, and it is more than enough." Safe Nest Properties now manages properties in 3 states. The Haven has become a model for similar programs in other cities. The coffee shops host poetry slams and community organizing meetings and birthday celebrations for regulars who have become like family. My life is full in ways I never imagined possible during those dark days standing in the rain outside my grandmother's house, betrayed and alone. The irony isn't lost on me. In trying to take everything from me, my family inadvertently gave me the push I needed to create something far greater than what I might have had if I'd continued accepting their treatment. Sometimes the greatest gift is being forced to stand on your own, to discover that you've been strong enough all along.